What's going on, everyone? This is Joe here with the NPBA Johto Power Rankings for Season 4, and I'm joined today by the Season 1 champion, Bad Guy Cam.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Super excited to be doing some power rankings with you all today. I'm going to let Joe kind of take it over and do his thing.
All right, so I think this is the second to last video that'll be coming out on the power rankings, but none of the other ones went over the format, so this is just National Dex Legacy, meaning cut moves are allowed, hidden power and pursuit are banned, and then teams had to draft 11 Pokemon with 115 points, and that was standard for everyone, so there was no range of Pokemon you could draft. Otherwise, this is a showdown league, and I think that's all the rules I can think of. So I'm just going to start off and go to the first team. So we're doing this in draft order, not ranking order. So the first team is the first pick, and so on. So first up, we have the Saffron City Knicks. I have rated them 9th, and Cam has rated them 5th. So I think this team is very strong offensively. You've got 4 kind of insane. I guess 3 of them are wall breakers with Melmetal, Lele, Urshifu, and Dragapult is more of a fast attacking pivot. But the reason I put this team a bit lower was the defense is a little lackluster, and I didn't really think. I don't know if Nidoqueen is meant to be defensive on this team, but it seems to me like it's kind of forced into that role, being the only real reliable hazard setter besides Shuckle, which you don't want to bring every week. So that's kind of my biggest issue with this team, but I definitely like the offense in the first 4 picks.
Yeah, the offense on this team is just insane with those first 4 picks. Like you said, I rank this one a little bit higher, mainly based off of that factor. I do feel like that trio of Dragapult, Melmetal, and Lele are just going to run through some teams. And I think the actual unsung hero of this team is the Mega Sableye pick. I think that is such a neat pick. It doesn't pair up the best with Dragapult, in my opinion, because it has some shared weaknesses. But I think you're right in saying that there's no general, there's no, how do you want to say it? Specific defensive mons that you're going to be kind of relying on week in, week out. I think that the general bulk on the team is actually kind of crazy. If you look at the average on the defense and the special defense, they're both above 100 for the team. And yeah, that's going to be thrown off a little bit by the Shuckle and things like that. But there's a lot of general bulk. And I'm thinking that that's kind of going to be the strategy with this team, is just to absorb some of those hits while you're able to set up with a Dragapult or get an Urshifu in there to do some major damage and do some wall breaking that allows something like a Lele to come in and sweep. I think that there's a lot of decent synergy on this team, but I would agree that there aren't very many straight up defensive mons, except for maybe the Sableye and the Nidoqueen, like you said as well.
Yeah, I think another thing I had a problem with was the fairy weakness is pretty big here. You have Pult, Urshifu, and Sableye all weak to fairy, and then your only fairy killers. Well, I guess you have Melmetal and Nidoqueen, so it's not like you have only one option. But I don't necessarily like having 3 weak to fairy. Mega Sableye with Pult is a bit weird to me. Like you said, they do share some weaknesses, or I guess they share one weakness because Sableye only has one. But I guess in my analysis, I kind of forgot that Melmetal existed in terms of killing fairies. So I was like, this team's super weak to fairy, but that's not actually true. So maybe I was a little too harsh on that. That said, the lack of a true defensive option is a little weird with Nidoqueen. It's bulky, but it's not generally used that way. With it mainly being just a sheer force attacker, I think Rotom-Mow could definitely come defensive a lot of times. But this is in I don't really count Shuckle as a defensive Pokemon. It's more like a lead that just gets hazards and dies. But Sableye can maybe fill that role, and this can just be a hyper offense team with some like a bulky hyper offense team. So I guess that's sort of the read for this team.
Yeah, I think the one thing that this team really could have used that would have just been like really, really fantastic is to really build up that Melmetal in a way that it could be a little bit of a better of a breaker, and getting like a solid trick room setter on the team. I know right now the only like trick room setter is Chimecho, which, I mean, that's a pretty decent pickup. I believe it was 1 point at the end of the draft. But I do think that could have been a really interesting strategy, just knowing that like you have that option to be able to bring in a Melmetal and have it just do some damage and break some walls to set. Yeah, I do think that you're right. It's going to be a very much an offensively based team. And if they can pull that off, then these mons are just going to run through teams. But if they are not able to do that and they're not able to take some of the hits that are coming their way, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to handle some of the other teams, which is why I have it a little bit lower. But I do think that the general offensive presence on this team on both the physical and the special side is something to be pretty scared of.
Definitely. And this theme of having a very offensive and not very defensive team, I noted for a lot of other teams. It was very rare that I had a 2 defensive team. I think there may have been like 1 or 2 that were like more on the defensive side, but everyone is pretty much either balanced or kind of hyper offense. So that will be coming up again. I think we can move on.
Let's do it.
So the next team, we have a huge disparity in our rankings on. Team $10 billion. So I will say I drafted a lot of this team for this coach because he was like busy when the draft was going on, but he made a lot of free agent transactions, so it's not entirely done by me. I really like this team, mainly because Kyurem Black plus Mega Medicham seems almost impossible to deal with, unless you just have something really fast, like, I guess honestly like Dragonite, like the last team, because both of those don't really want to deal with that. But then Gengar can also be a nice faster option to help them. And that issue with them being a bit slow is really helped by Ribombee, which I think is one of the best picks for this team. Otherwise, you do have a pretty decent electric weakness in your bulkier Pokemon, Celesteela, Mandibuzz, and Slowking, which is definitely an issue when your only ground type is Marowak. So that's all I can think of to say right now.
Yeah, we'll talk about the disparity. Yeah. First thing I'm going to talk about is the fact that Kyurem Black and Celesteela together, to me, that is just a monstrous pairing. Like, I feel like they pair super well together. They do a lot of things differently. I feel like Kyurem Black, you're going to be more of like a wall breaker where you're either going to be running like Scarf or a Band, maybe like a subset of some sort, but where it doesn't get the Dragon Dance or the Scale Shot, it's not going to be more the setup mon, whereas Celesteela can be run a little bit more defensively. You can run it set up with like a Power or Meteor Beam Autotomized set, or you can run it, bulky with Leech Seed and stuff like that. But my biggest problems with this team were, like you mentioned, having your main defensive mons of Celesteela, Mandibuzz, and Slowking all being weak to electric. That's kind of a big problem because a lot of mons get electric coverage, and so being able to tap into that is going to not be the best. On the other side, I can also see Ghost being a bit of a weakness with Gengar, Medicham, and Slowking. I just feel like there's a lot of defensive things that needed to be addressed that could potentially be big problems from a defensive side. I 100% agree with the Ribombee statement, though. That was a great pickup in being able to set the sticky webs with the fighting resistance that it's able to help out Kyurem Black. I think that's a really, really good pairing. But then if we look at some of the lower picks, like with such a big electric weakness and then grabbing Marowak as your ground type as your only electric immunity, I don't think that's the best pick. I do think that some of the other picks are pretty decent with like the Ribombee and the Magneton. I think those were some good trades that they did. But overall, I just think that it's kind of an easy team to prep for from an offensive standpoint. And if you're prepping as the offense, and if you're prepping on a defensive standpoint, you know that the Kieran Black's going to hit hard and the Medichamp's going to hit hard off the bat on the physical side, and then you have a Gengar. But outside of that, I really didn't see many other options that were going to be huge breakers for me if I was going up against this team, if that makes sense. So that's why I ended up going a little bit lower with this one.
Yeah, I definitely see that. There's one other thing to mention, that this team actually has a very good Trick Room option with Slowking, and then you have Marowak, Celesteela, even Kecleon, as mainly Marowak and Celesteela, though, as very good offensive options in Slowking, with Slowking Trick Room, which could come some weeks, and I think that could be pretty nice, actually.
I could definitely see that. To me, Marowak is a very interesting Pokemon. I feel like it's just like, I don't know, you give it the item, what's its item? The Thick Club? That's what it is, right? Like, and it can get a pretty good attack boost, but at the same time, that's pretty much all that's really going for it. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of a Marowak pick. That's just me personally, though. But I see what you're saying, and that could definitely happen. I think that Slowking is actually a really good mon on this team. I just think it's unfortunate that it shares so many weaknesses with the other Pokemon on the team.
Yeah, I was coordinating with this person. We both picked Kieran Black first, and we were like, it'd be really funny if we drafted the same team. But then and so we were both planning to get Slowking, which we did, which pairs very well with Kieran Black because you can teleport into it, and also with Mega Medicham. I didn't get Mega Medicham, but I was looking for I guess I was looking for a defogger. So I was between Corviknight and Gliscor, and I went with Gliscor because it didn't have the electric weakness. And then with this team, he went with Celesteela, which does have the electric weakness and is also not a defogger. It's just a completely different pick. So that's, I don't know, that's just kind of an observation. Like, I don't know if, I guess it was the second pick for Celesteela, so you can't really say much about it, but I don't know if the weaknesses were really planned out beforehand, but we'll see. This team is 2-0 right now, by the way, as this video is being made.
I don't doubt it. Like, just looking at some of these mons, like, it's definitely got a lot of scary mons. I just felt like the team synergy wasn't quite there.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. We can move on to the next one. So this is Gudra Gang, Glenn or G4's team, and we both have it at 7. If you want to go, you can start this one if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So having gone up against Glenn multiple times, season 2 final being a good example, he loves his bulky teams. And I think that looking at this team, this fits very much a Glenn model of a team where you have the Feeny, the Mega Aggron, the Gudra, the Fortress, Audino, like so many bulky mons here. And then you get like an Urshifu and a Victini, which naturally have a lot of bulk. I think this team has a lot of potential to do really well. The one thing that really kind of like pushed it down for me was the speed tiers, where he has 3 mons at 80 and 3 at 50. And then you kind of have Zeraora on that top end at like 143, Victini 100, Urshifu 97. And there's just kind of all over, like, it's not very spread out. And so I feel like that's really easy to prep for. And then the other thing on this team that brought it down a bit for me was the lack of a really good special attacker. That was kind of a common theme I saw with a lot of the teams, is that there's a lot of physical offense, but not a lot of special offense. I feel like you're either having to run like a setup Zeraora or a Victini in order to really hit hard. Masquerain is a very cool pick, which I think is probably one of the best 1-point picks that you can get, where it gets a bunch of different setup options like Quiver Dance. You can also run it with like Defog and things like that. So a very cool mon to use. But those are kind of the main reasons why I put Glenn at 7.
Yeah, so Glenn last season had Urshifu, Aggron, Gudra, so he kind of just took the same team again, which is funny. But I agree with basically everything you said. Tapu Fini is also another special offense option.
True.
and it's really nice because you have the Calm Mind Sword Power set. You can also do that on Victini, or you can run Iron Defense. So that's a cool setup option there with Fini. Some other things I didn't love were like the defogging here is kind of awkward because Fini usually doesn't like defog because you have to get rid of Surge, and it also means you are like you don't. Fini's a weird defensive Pokemon because it doesn't get Pivot and it can't like run Toxic and stuff because of Surge. So it's sort of a weird defogger, and then Drifblim is just like not good, unfortunately. And Masquerain, like I do like Masquerain a lot. I see it more as of a web setter. And Quiver Dance is also an option. I don't think it'll be a defogger. But you do have the Fortress. The only problem with the Fortress is then you have Fortress and Aggron on the same team, which are two steel types that are like Aggron is decently offensive, not like the strongest in the world, but pretty good. And Fortress is very passive. And they're both like hazard setters. So I think it might be weird to see like both coming in the same matchup. And I think most of the time you just rather have the Aggron because it's just better. And then one other problem besides the speed, I guess I have two other problems. One is there's a big ground weakness in the main Pokemon with Zeraora, Victini, and Mega Aggron, and then nothing resisting ground until you get to Electros, and then Drifblim and Masquerain, which aren't coming very often. And then once again with Electros, then you have two electric types, even though I do like Electros for that immunity, but it is a little awkward with the doubling of the types, I'd say. And then the last thing is you do not have a grounded poison type, so Toxic Spikes could be an issue. I know like Urshifu and Goodra and Victini really do not want to get poisoned because they do rely on their bulk sometimes rather than being like fast. But Tapu Fini having Misty Surge mitigates that to some extent because you can, if Misty Surge is up, Toxic Spikes don't work. So you can pivot around it as long as you have the Surge up.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, just those are some of the notes I have as well with the type diversity of. I feel like that they do different enough things that they kind of make sense together. Like the Mega Aggron and the Fortress are doing two very different things. The Zeraora, the Electros are doing two very different things. But I do think that does make it a little bit easier to plan for, knowing that, hey, like I could slap a, fire move on something and I'm going to be hitting the Mega Aggron or Fortress, whichever decides to come. So it makes that prep for the opponent a little bit easier. But yeah, I totally agree with all of that. Overall, I do think that it is a scary team. It's going to be very, very hard to break down. And let's not forget, Urshifu Single Strike is super, super strong. Like, yeah, and that thing is terrifying. So not only like do they have a Victini and a Mega Aggron that can really do some damage, or like you said, set up Tapu Fini, there's also an Urshifu Single Strike that's just waiting to punch your face in. So
yeah. I'm realizing that when I look at this, I think everything here gets set up. Literally every Pokemon. I don't know what Goodra has. Maybe Goodra doesn't get set up, but the first 5 all do, and then I know like Masquerain does at least. So that's pretty cool. And I know in his first game he won with a setup Pokemon. I guess I won't spoil beyond that.
I saw that too. It was a very good setup.
It went very well. So we can move it on to the next one. We have our first very highly ranked team, the Volcaronavirus. So first of all, very good team name. One
of the best I've ever heard.
For sure. This is a team that like it's very, very potent offensively. Kind of like what I was saying with the first team. But the difference here is this team also has very good defensive options. Like your first 4 are just monstrously offensive Pokemon with like all of them doing different things, like Gallade just being strong on its own, Rillaboom with priority, Excadrill in the sand, and then Volcarona with Quiver Dance. And then the next 4 picks, I'm not going to count Avalugg because I don't think it's like good. The next 4 are all like very good defensively and also offensively, except Credilli is really only defensive. So I really like that you have Togekiss, Milotic, and Gigalith that can like both be run as defensive like support options with their various like utilities that they have, and also just do a lot of damage. Like they just have really high offensive stats as well.
Yeah, this team, I put it as number one because of just how many potential threats there are, like you said, with the defense to back it up. So obviously you've got your Gigalith, which is going to be setting sand for the Excadrill. Mega Gallade is one of the best Pokemon that you can draft in Draft League. There's a reason it's always up on 18 points. And then you have the Rillaboom, which does a lot of really good things for this team. Like it provides additional recovery for the walls of Milotic and Gigalith if you're going that direction. It also provides an Earthquake resist to the Excadrill. I think that the synergy is just insane on this team, and having to prep for a Mega Gallade, a Rillaboom, an Excadrill in Sand, or whatever else it does, because Excadrill is super versatile, all while having the threat of a Volcarona in the back that can Quiver Dance and set up in front of you is just, I feel like having to prep for all of these threats while knowing you still need to break through some of these is going to be extremely difficult to do. Kind of to the point I made on one of the earlier teams, I do think that with Togekiss and Milotic sharing a weakness as two of your main walls, that's not ideal. However, they both do get reliable recovery in Recover and Roost, I believe. Togekiss gets Roost, right?
It gets Roost and Soft Boiled.
See, exactly. It's got two options there. But then you also have your ground type in Excadrill and Electavire, which gets the Motor Drive, which provides 2 immunities to that as well. So I think that there's enough there that it doesn't really matter as much. One thing I'm also going to call out is I really do enjoy the lower tier picks on this team. I know you said you didn't like Avalugg. Avalugg is a very niche Pokemon, but if in the right situation, you can get it in as a good defensive mon, or you really need a rapid spinner and you don't want Excadrill to be your rapid spinner, it can do really well in that role. And then Electivire and Liepard, I think, are really 2 good lower tier picks. I think Electivire can be run multiple different ways offensively, and Liepard is a really great pivot mon that can, kind of do some annoying things, and that's pretty much what it's going to do. Overall, there were very few weaknesses I saw on this team. I think the biggest one being there's a pretty good fighting weakness with all the rock types and steel types and ice types and things like that. But where you have a Togekiss that can handle that pretty decently, that's kind of like the biggest weakness. But aside from that, I really couldn't see too much else that I thought was going to be a problem. The other thing that might have been nice, but I don't think is completely necessary, is Stealth Rocks are the only form of hazards. There's no Spikes, Toxic Spikes, or Sticky Webs on this team, where having that option could have been nice. But other than that, I'm having a hard time finding anything super wrong with this team.
Yeah, I have a couple nitpicky things. So one is maybe a bigger thing. There's 4 things weak to fighting. I think it's 4. Actually, it's 5, according to this.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
You have 5 fighting weaknesses, and you do have some resistances. But you also have 4 steel weaknesses, which is a very rare type to be weak to. Like, you never hear that this team is super weak to steel. But Togekiss, Gigalith, Credilli, and Avalugg. I guess I would say I don't really love Credilli here, mainly just because it's also a rock type. Like, if it was pure grass, I think it would be pretty good in this team. But sharing the rock type with Gigalith, Gigalith is pretty much better every time, unless you really want Storm Drain, which I think that's probably why it was drafted for Storm Drain, and then just another hazard setter. Otherwise, there's no grounded poison type, so hazards like poison, Toxic Spikes will be a problem. And then there's no dragon type. I don't really personally care about that, but some people really are caught up in always having the fairy dragon steel core and all that. I personally think you only need fairy and steel, but dragon does provide some weaknesses or some resistances, so that's just something to note, but I didn't consider that part too much.
Same. I feel like synergy is synergy. It doesn't have to be specific typings, because even if you do run the cores that are traditionally, your dragon, fairy, steel, or, fire, water, grass, I mean, you can have different mons that are going to share weaknesses even across that. So I totally agree with what you're saying. I think that fairy and steel are 2 of the more important types to grab. I do think this team has 2 of some of the better fairy and steel types in Excadrill and Togekiss.
For sure. I think we can go to the next one.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So we have the high neuters, another big disparity. So this is probably the most interesting, maybe second most interesting team in this video. Um, we don't have the points listed here of what everything costs, but Landorus, Mew, Mega Diancie all are 18 pointers. Somehow this was drafted, and this was 6th pick, so like I don't really know how this happened, but one team got
Doesn't
all of
make
those,
sense.
and
It
weirdly,
makes no sense.
yeah, and weirdly, all three they don't share any weaknesses, and they don't necessarily. Oh wait, no, sorry, Mega Diancie and Landorus share water,
Mhm.
but they don't necessarily cover the resistances. But that's nice that you can get 3 super strong things that aren't really weak to the same thing besides water, which isn't a super common offensive type, more of a defensive type. Um, and then another thing I really like, you have insane hazard support. You have 6 things with Stealth Rock, and then 2 spikes, 2 toxic spikes. Obviously, Mew gets everything, so like it's kind of redundant to just count it every time, but it does get everything. And you got very good pivoting. You have 4 defoggers, 3 heal bellers, even. Trying to think what else I have here. Mainly, Landorus and Mega Diancie are going to be extremely potent threats. And then on the defensive side, you have Vaporeon Registeel, which is a great combo because Vaporeon can wish into the Registeel. And then Crobat is there for speed, which I like a lot.
I think it's just insane that they were able to get Landorus, Mew, and Mega Diancie on the same team. Like when I first saw that, when I started doing these power rankings, I almost like did a double take because I was like, "There's no way," but there they are. But I totally agree. Vaporeon Registeel is a really good defensive core. I think that with the versatility of Mew and what it can do, I think that it's pretty much going to come every single week. Landorus and Mega Diancie are an interesting pairing. I feel like out of those main 3, I think those 2 are the 2 that make the least sense together, and not just because they share that water typing, but I do think that Landorus kind of does everything Mega Diancie does, just maybe a little bit better. In my opinion, I'm actually not a huge fan of Mega Diancie, even though I consider drafting it this time around in Kanto, but I feel like Mega Diancie is actually pretty easy to counter, especially if you have a decent steel type. It really can't do anything to you. So I personally would have liked to see a different fairy type on this team instead of that Mega Diancie, but I totally understand. Like if you see that it's still there in round 3, I totally understand grabbing it. It makes the most sense in the world. The biggest issue I see with this team really is that water type, though. Like aside from the Decidueye, like a bulky water type just kind of sits in front of this team and doesn't do, and the only thing that can really touch it is that Decidueye, and I guess the Mew if you brought it like specifically to handle a bulky water type, which is the beauty of Mew and everything that it does. The other thing I'm also not a huge fan of is the Guzzlord as a dark type. I think that dark type is a really important type to have within Draft League, but I don't think that Guzzlord really fits what this team needs it to do. And then on the other side of things, I do think that where you already have a Landorus, I'm not 100% feeling the Sandaconda pick. I love Sandaconda. I think it's a really great low tier ground type to pick up. But where you already have so many Stealth Rock options, I think the only thing it's really bringing to the team is like Lair, which you've already kind of got a Registeel that can do Thunder Waves and other things that can do that. I just feel like on this team, the lower tier picks weren't quite up to what I would like to see, but that kind of happens when you draft so many high tier points. You kind of have to pick some of the lower tier mons that are gonna kind of do the job, but there's definitely other things that could have done the job better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I totally agree on Guzzlord. I think it's a terrible Pokemon. It was 7 points last season, and I meant to lower it to like 5, but I forgot. But it still got drafted anyway, so so people are still willing to pay 7 for it. I don't really know what it does. I know it has knockoff. It only has 101 attack. It's very slow. It has the problem with its stat spread. It's like it has decent attack and special attack, but you rarely want that. And then it's not really as bulky as it seems. Like it has a ton of HP, but its defenses are super low. So it's like decently bulky, but not to an extreme extent. So it kind of fails to function as like a dark or a dragon, even though it's both. So I would have really liked to see that either just like a different dark type or somewhere in these low tiers, a nice electric type would have been really good to help with the waters. I do like Garbodor a lot for toxic spikes. I think that's one of the better low tiers. Sandaconda, I agree with you. Mainly Sandaconda and Guzzlord would be my issues here. With Mega Diancie, the way you stop it is with having a decent steel type, but like every team has a decent steel type, and this team has Landorus. So, and I mean even Sandaconda in Monferno if you want to bring both of them. So it should be able to get around it for the most part. So I think that's kind of the pairing with Landorus, Mega Diancie. You can get rid of those steel types that are going to cause problems because nothing else really walls Diancie. I can't think of anything that would defensively besides steel, and it does get Earth power. So something to note there. That's why I had it obviously a lot higher than you because I don't see that as being too much of a problem if you can just kind of have two offensive things. With Landorus and Mega Diancie, even though they end up doing similar things, which is just like do a ton of damage and maybe use Rock Polish. Having two on the same team, it's kind of similar to like breaking the what is it called? Like the dupes clause where you can only bring one of a certain Pokemon. If you have two Pokemon, they're very similar. Like, yes, that's generally not what you'd want to do. But also they're just very strong, so it's kind of like they have to kill the same Pokemon twice, which is kind of funny to think about. They have similar speed tiers and decently similar coverage as well, besides Diancie getting Fairy and then Landorus getting Poison. So I was a pretty big fan of that offensive pairing, but I definitely see the glaring holes that are in the low tier slots.
Should we move on to the next?
Get to the next one. So I think you'll notice from here on out, the pictures are going to look a little different because I was like doing this on different days, and I think I've messed something up, but it doesn't really matter. So we have the Driftville Derps in the upper middle rankings. Me at 8, you at 6. Do you want to go ahead with this one?
Yeah, I like this team a lot. It's really fun. I think that having Toxapex Ferrothorn as your core is super annoying. That's easily, one of the most annoying cores defensively that you have to deal with. Tapu Koko is a really great mon. I think that Dragonite is a really fun mon to use. I think that it's got a really interesting ability. It can Dragon Dance, it can set up, it can be run more defensively. Really a lot of utility there. It can be kind of hard to use sometimes, and the one thing I am going to call out is I'd love Alola Ninetales, but I think Alola Ninetales and Dragonite on the same team isn't always the best option, because if you get that hail set up and you're breaking that multi-scale on the Dragonite, you either have to run like safety goggles to prevent that, or you're not bringing your fairy type to act as a dragon immunity to your Dragonite. So as much as I love those two Pokemon individually, I don't think they fit super well on the same team. But aside from that, Mega Absol is one of my all-time favorite megas. I think it's one of the most underrated megas. It can hit hard on the special side. It can hit hard on the physical side, which is mostly what it's known for. I mean, you get Sword Stance, Sucker Punch, and Knockoff. Like one of the best offensive dark types. It doesn't do as well defensively, but I mean, you're drafting it for what it's going to do. And when you already have the Toxapex Ferrothorn, I think that you're pretty much covered. Moltres, Runerigress, two very good pickups. Overall, I do think that this team has a lot of really good bulk and a lot of good options for physical offense. If there's anything it's really lacking, it's a really good special breaker on the team. Moltres being the highest special attack at 125. Mega Absol can do some things. Tapu Koko, obviously, with the electric terrain, can do quite a bit. But aside from that, I really think that it needed a little bit more punching power on the special side. But other than that, I really like this team. I think it's a really fun team that they put together.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think I was mentioning this earlier, this is one of the few teams where I thought it was maybe a little too defensive with Toxapex Ferrothorn. I like the core a lot. It was my Season 2 championship team pairing, actually, with those two. But I also had a Mega Latias, which may have not really been fair. But that was in the ancient days of this server. I like the Moltres pairing with those two a lot. So you get the Fire, Water, Grass, and then two of them can set hazards, like different hazards. Stealth Rock Spikes for Pharaoh, and then Toxic for Toxapex. And then Moltres comes for the Defog and the U-Turn. So I think all three of those pair very nicely, and then their resistances and weaknesses get covered pretty well. The special breaker thing is definitely an issue because nothing really has special setup. I think actually there's Calm Mind, Tapu Koko. I can't really remember. But
Mega Absol also gets Calm Mind.
Oh, it does? Okay, I've never used it. So I guess if you want a special breaker, you can run Calm Mind, Mega Absol, but that's a little weird.
Yeah.
I would say the biggest issue is the thing you mentioned with Alolan Ninetales is very strange here. I think it was this drafter was trying to go for like the Arctozolt thing, and I think Arctozolt got taken by someone else who has like Abomasnow Arctozolt, which is also not very good. So I think they both split it. Or I'm not sure how it happened, but Arctovish is definitely a lot worse. Not a lot worse, but a decent bit worse than Arctozolt just because of that typing, like not having the Bolt Beam coverage, but rather like Water Ice, which isn't like the best. So I think that was a little bit forced and maybe could have just been dropped for something else, especially because the Hail is a bit of an anti-synergy. I definitely like Runerigus. I've used it, and I think it's very strong. But the one other thing I had here was Beware and Gallade on the same team didn't make a lot of sense because they kind of do the same thing. They have literally the same attack stat. Beware is just a little bulkier, a lot bulkier physically, and then Gallade's a lot bulkier especially. But and then Gallade's much faster, a much better scarf holder. So, and Gallade has way better coverage. So I would have probably just not taken Beware. It's kind of weird because Beware was taken first and then Gallade. But I think Gallade fits this team a lot better. I like it a lot here, but I think Beware could just be something else. But otherwise, you pretty much get all the boxes on this team. All the boxes checked. You have good hazard support on 3 defoggers and 3 hazard setters, and then pivoting maybe could be a bit better. You only have Koko, Moltres, and then Teleport on Gallade. So that's something to note, but not a huge deal, I don't think.
No, I think that's a good point out. I kind of had forgotten about that. I do think that pivoting is pretty important, but where I think that most weeks Coco's going to make it, I think Coco's definitely the better fairy type than the Alolan Ninetales is. So I think that's going to be coming more often than not. And when it doesn't come, I think the Moltres is going to be there. So having those 2 options are probably going to be enough. It's going to take some definite, predictions and making sure that you're getting your mons in at the right time. But that's also the nice thing about using Toxapex and Ferrothorn is, you can always have 2 mons that you're switching in. They're going to be able to take some hits and then potentially get some hazards up to let something later on, like a Mega Absol or a Dragonite or a Tapu Koko, really start to, punch through.
Yeah, and Toxapex, even though it doesn't have pivot moves, having Regenerator is in itself kind of a pivot move because you still get value out of switching outside of the switch itself. So Toxapex can still act as a defensive pivot despite not having like Flip Turn or whatever, which would be insane. I shouldn't have even said that. They're probably going to give it Flip Turn now.
Oh my goodness, that would be a nightmare. You'd have to like ban it.
It would probably be like 17 points would be my guess.
It would be way up there.
Yeah, that would be fun to use, but not to play against. But yeah, if I was this team, I would get rid of the Hail thing with Arctovish, Ninetales, and then Beware, and then probably add maybe one more pivot that has like good special offense, or maybe 2 things that do those things. So
I totally agree with that. If the other 8 mons on the team are fantastic, very happy with them. If that could just be remediated, I think this team would be pushing for one of the top teams in this division.
Yeah, for sure. And the speed tiers line up very well. We haven't been mentioning that every time, but they hit all the sections except 80 to 60, which is like that's fine.
Totally agree.
So next up, we got our first one that's a bit on the lower end, the Jersey Jellicents. So at a first glance, I don't think this team looks bad, but then like the more I thought about it, the more I kind of didn't like it. You have like really good pivots in your first 3 Pokemon. Like they all have pivot moves, and they all can deal a good amount of damage. But the problem comes from, for me, very heavily on the hazard support. You only have Stealth Rock on Hippowdon and Spikes on Chestnut, which by itself isn't terrible. Like, those are both pretty good Pokemon that you're not unhappy about bringing. But you only have Defog on Tornadus and Rapid Spin on Komala as your removal options. So unless you want to bring Komala, you're forced to run Defog Tornadus every time. Unless you just want to ignore hazards, which is also valid. But that was kind of the biggest thing for me, that like Tornadus is such a good Pokemon because it's so versatile, but it doesn't really have that option on this team, and it's almost like not a wasted pick, but it's like a debilitated pick. Like, it's not as good as its point value because it's going to be a defogger almost every time, rather than like a nasty plot sweeper or something like that.
I 100% agree with that. Yeah, I actually had hazards marked as a pretty big thing on this team as well. Just the fact that, to what you said, Tornadus is supposed to be one of the most versatile mons. That's why it's up there on the point scale. But I think that with what the rest of the team is doing, it kind of gets pigeonholed into doing like one job pretty much every single week. Because you think about your other option for removal is Komala, which shares typings with Mega Kangaskhan and Lickitung. So having 3 normal types on the team is kind of interesting. I don't feel like that's really bringing too much to the table, especially where there's no need for that many ghost immunities. There's no psychic types on the team. There's no ghost types on the team except for the Dusk Noir, which I don't know why you would have that many resistances just for a Dusk Noir. But overall, I think that this team just had too many holes to really like say that the synergy just isn't there, right? Like, I think that there's some really neat mons on this team. I think Primarina is one of the best Pokemon. I think it's one of the neatest Pokemon you can pick up, especially for the point level it's at. It's a really good breaker. It's got a lot of good coverage. Again, and Raikou is also a pretty decent pickup. But I think outside of those first 3, and then maybe the Hippowdon Dracovish, that's pretty much it that I see for this team. There's not a lot of special options. Like you have the Primarina and the Raikou, which actually cover each other's weaknesses pretty well, but outside of that, there's no real options. And then on the physical side, you have a lot more there, but I just don't feel like it's coming together. And I feel like that there's a lot of things that would need to happen for this team to really, come through.
Yeah, I have also no fairy resistance, despite having the Dracovish and the Chestnut being weak to fairy. I really didn't like. Of your first few Pokemon, Muckalola is like, I guess, the dedicated fairy killer, but it actually doesn't resist fairy because of the dark typing. So I think that kind of didn't fit here, especially with no steel type, which is like a very important type to have on basically every team. The Lickitung is like, all it does is wish passing, which isn't terrible for a 1-pointer, but you already have Mega Kangaskhan and Komala, the other 2 normal types, as wish passers, which both do that better. And then I had one other thing I was going to say, but I forgot, so I'll just won't say it. The reason I didn't have this team at 16 and had it a little bit higher was because Hippowdon Dracovish could just win sometimes. So it's not like you can't just like write this team off, because you always have to prep for that, and you might just lose to Dracovish because you weren't ready for it.
I can see that. Dracovish is always scary. I've definitely had matches where I've come up against that Sandstream Dracovish combo, and it can take more than a couple mons on the turns that it has sand up. So definitely something to be careful for, but at the same time, it's also kind of something that, as you look at the team, you're going to need to plan for. So just having that in the back of your mind of knowing, I need to have something to take care of this, you're already kind of pre-prepping for that. And I think that with what Dracovish does is very scary, but outside of that, it doesn't do much else.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you draft it for one purpose, and you know what it's going to do, so that's not the worst thing in the world. But I think in general, you would like a little more versatility on this team. The only thing here that's really going to have a versatile role is like, will Mega Kangaskhan be all offense or 3 attacks plus wish, which is, I think, is like actually a really good set because its HP is so high. But overall, this just ends up falling on the lower end.
I would agree with that.
All right, so next team, Um, we have the Long Island Landos. Um, this team, you don't see the point values, but this team has all of their Pokemon are like mid tier or better besides Sandslash, which I think is interesting. It makes the analysis of it very different. Um, Unfortunately, I don't know if it was executed very well because you kind of have no real like dedicated defensive options on this team. Like you have the specially defensive Araquanid, and then Landorus is pretty good physically defensively if you run it that way. But like we said with the Tornadus on the last team, you don't want to be forced into defensive Lando every time. And otherwise, like your only defensive Pokemon is going to be Sandslash, which is basically just a worse version of Landorus. So I didn't love that. And then this is also weak to a good amount of typings. Like there's a pretty big fighting weakness here with 3 things weak to it. I'd have to look at the chart again, but you can go ahead while I try to figure out what else I was going to say.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very interesting team for me. I think that there are a lot of decent pieces. I think when it comes to drafting with a set number, so like how we had a set 11 mons that we had to pick up, there's 2 basic strategies that can be kind of tweaked a little bit, but you're either drafting a lot of higher points and lower points to compensate for those higher points, or it ends up being kind of a muddle of like middle points. And I think that this one ends up in the middle, and that can be done really well. I just don't see exactly where this team is going. I think that it does a little bit more than the last team we just looked at. I think Araquanid, with the sticky webs and being able to be a good defensive mon, actually helps this team out a ton. It really works well with the Landorus, the Hydreigon, and sets those 2 mons up to do really, really well. Everything else is kind of interesting. I've never seen a Mega Glalie be drafted before, so I'm very interested to see how that turns out. And the rest of the team has some really interesting picks, especially on the physically offensive side, where you have like a Breloom, a Bisharp. We already have the Landorus that we talked about. I think there's some very, very interesting offensive options here, and I think that that's what they were going for on this team. At least just kind of looking at it, is a very hyper offensive team without necessarily having those defensive mons. Because if you look at it, you have Inteleon, Breloom, Toxtricity, Bisharp, Landorus, Hydreigon, Blacephalon. All of these mons are super, super strong on the offensive sides. It's just they don't do as well on the defensive side. Even Hatterene, I didn't mention Hatterene, but I think Hatterene's a very interesting pickup here. So I think that if they can pull out that offense every week and they are able to have a good matchup, then this team could do really well. On the flip side, if there's enough defense on the other team, I think that this team might just get stopped in its tracks and be whittled down, so that it's not going to matter that you have all these defensive mons if they're going to be taken out in like O code or 2 code with every mon that's coming in.
Yeah. One thing I would definitely change here is just taking out Bisharp and making it any bulky steel, because you don't have a bulky steel right now, and your steel doesn't resist fairy. You do have the Toxtricity to help with fairies, but Bisharp is like, it's just another random offensive Pokemon. Like, it has the same offensive stats as Breloom, pretty much 125 attack compared to 130 on Breloom, and then 70 speed. So yes, they have different coverage, but like, it's just like another physical attacker when you already have like Landorus, Breloom, even like you could run physically offensive Blacephalon, actually. Yeah. But I don't think it's necessarily needed. And then Mega Glalie is going to run Return a lot, so that's really more of a physical thing. And then with Hatterene, I really like Hatterene. It's very bulky. It has 136 special attack, but it really thrives in Trick Room, and this team was not really drafted for Trick Room. The next slowest thing is Araquanid, which is supposed to be a web setter, which is like the opposite of Trick Room. And then you have like Sandslash, which isn't really that good. Like, it's just kind of the worst Landorus. And then beyond that, everything is 70 base speed or higher, which is too fast for Trick Room. So I would really like to see Bisharp be something else. That's, if it was bulky steel, it'd be slower and maybe help out like that Trick Room option, which could be pretty cool with the Hatterene. But otherwise, you have this like fairy type that ends up being a bit too slow in a lot of matches. And it feels like maybe you don't really have the most consistent fairy type every week.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I really do enjoy Hatterene, and it does really do best with Trick Room options. So yeah, like I'm trying to think, maybe like a Copper instead of like a Bisharp would be a really good option there. It's also a little less points, and then maybe you can reinvest that into something else. Not sure. Do what you want. This is this is not my team, but I do think that that would be a pretty decent option there. But overall, I think that this team is going to cause some problems. I just think that there are going to be plenty of ways to slow this team down.
Yeah, and it does have something a bit unique that has a ton of breakers with Toxtricity, Blacephalon, and Hydreigon and Lando, and even Glalie, all just doing a ton of damage right when they come out. You don't really need to set up with them, which I think can be really nice. So that makes this team very explosive. So it will sometimes be able to just win out of that if the other team isn't bulky enough or doesn't have the proper checks.
Agreed. Like this is definitely a wild card team in my opinion, because sometimes that hyper offense can do really, really well, and sometimes you can just get shut down.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can move to the next. We've got the West Virginia Wingles. So I gotta look at my notes on this. If you can start it out if you want.
Yeah, I can kick us off on this one. Very interesting team with this one. I ended up going a little bit lower on this one. Some of the things I do like about this team, I really enjoy Mega Aerodactyl. I think that's a really fun pickup. Cinderace is also a really good mon. Even without the Libero ability, it still is super fast. It has a lot of really good coverage. Jirachi is a very fun mon that can do a whole bunch of things, including being annoying and flinching the crap out of stuff with Iron Head and Zen Headbutts. Other than that, I find this team to be a little lackluster, especially on the special side of things. So if we look at some of the mons that can hit on the special side, you have Jirachi, Rotom Wash, and Nidoking are basically your only special options, which none of them are really going to be super good breakers. I would say that Nidoking could potentially do the job with a Sheer Force Life Orb. Jirachi can set up, and I guess Rotom Wash, you could run like a spec set. But aside from that, you're not really going to have that special side of offense. So being able to prep for that is going to be fairly simple. On the offensive side, it's a little bit different where you have some cool picks like Druddigon and Tapu Bulu, like I said, Cinderace, Mega Aerodactyl. So there's some really neat stuff there. Overall, I think that I don't know, it's just not coming together for me. There's some really good things on this team, like some pivoting options with the Jirachi and the Cinderace and the Rotom. You've got some decent options for hazards with the Nidoking being able to do some things, and the Jirachi again, and the Druddigon. There's just something about this team that I'm not really thinking that is quite working together. I don't know, Jode, I'm going to let you take over.
So I kind of think like you have this idea in your head that like there's something about this team. I don't think there's something about this team. I think it's actually fine. I have it at 10, which is a little lower. Obviously, I'm not saying it's like a top contender, but it certainly could be. I think there's not as many problems as it may seem because you just have a lot of offensive power in Nidoking, Aerodactyl, and Cinderace. And then everything else, like you have 4 Stealth Rock Setters. I would say 3 of which are Jirachi and Druddigon are very good. And then Aerodactyl's never running rocks, and Nidoking might. You got Toxic Spikes on Nido, and then you got 2 Defoggers and a Rapid Spinner, and then 4 Pivots. So I think all of that really is just like what you need. I would have liked if Jirachi got teleport. I don't know why it doesn't get teleport, but it's whatever. Something that could have been better here, it was definitely the defense for me. It doesn't seem like there's a dedicated defensive Pokemon, which you don't necessarily need because you have Jirachi, Rotom, and Druddigon that can be defensive, and Granbull. But none of them are like super defensive. If you look at the team, the highest defense stat is going to be Bulu. which is like not usually run that way. And then the highest special defense stat is Hitmonlee, which doesn't count because it has 50 HP. And then you have like Rotomosh. So Rotomosh is definitely the most defensive thing here, but you don't have anything that's like got reliable recovery and can be super bulky unless you want to run defensive Jirachi, which I think this team would rather run an offensive Jirachi, which I think is very strong. And then my one other thing with this team is it simultaneously has 2 fairy types, but doesn't really have any fairy types. And that's kind of a weird statement, so I'll explain it. Bulu is not a fairy type. I think most people know that. It only knows Dazzling Gleam, so if you draft Bulu, it does not count as drafting a fairy type. And then you have Granbull, which is better as a fairy type than Bulu, because it has Intimidate and it has Play Rough, which will actually hit very hard with 120 attack. But it's not really bulky enough to like do what it needs to do. Like, it's so slow, and yes, it has okay HP, and it's decently bulky enough on the physical side, but it's so frail, especially with only 60 special defense. And you don't really want to run Assault Vest because it's not. Then you're not going to have like leftovers recovery. So it's like this weird spot where it's like you think it's offensive because it has good HP, but you also want it to be defensive as like a defensive fairy, but it's not quite there. And then it's too slow to be like just an always like offensively sweeping Pokemon. So I don't think Granbull can really even fill the role of a fairy type of like killing dragons and like coming in as just being bulky like most fairy types are. So that part of the team was a little weird for me. But maybe I'm just like having this weird thought in my head that like neither of them count as fairy types, and actually that's not a problem and they'll be fine. So
I think
we'll see.
You're totally right. When you look at Bulu, it's like it gets no fairy moves. Like the only thing it really does from like a fairy perspective is be immune to dragon, but it can't really do anything to a dragon type, and so it's this weird stalemate that it has. The one last thing I wanted to point out on this team on my side was I wasn't a huge fan of the speed tiers. You have out of your 11 Mons, 8 of them are at speed 87 or below, and your Trick Room option is the Jirachi. So, and you don't really have anything I would say that is like a good Trick Room Mon. Potentially a Dredagon, potentially a Granbull. But just with like the speeds of this team, it's going to allow a lot of other teams to be running, Adamant or Modest, which is going to kind of make that defensive problem a little bit bigger. Considering that you have the Mega Aerodactyl at 150, Jirachi at 190, or Jirachi at 100, and Cinderace at 119. Outside of that, you're going to need to either be running Scarf, or Hitmonlee is going to have to be doing some Unburden something or other to get up there on speed.
I think the speed is not as bad as it looks, and I'm actually running the calcs right now to make sure. What is the Pokemon? Hitmonlee. So if you have 87 base speed, then okay, never mind. No, wait, I'm wrong. Okay, so if you have 87 base speed, base 100 Pokemon are still forced to run Jolly against you, or Timid. It's literally the cutoff is 87, so I don't think this was done intentionally. If it was, that's a really big brain play, but 100 to 87 is like literally the exact range you can have, like the maximum you could possibly have, and to not have to worry about like base 97, like Urshifu getting Adamant or something like that, or like all the base 100s getting to be Adamant or Modest, because it's right on the cutoff. Base 100 Adamant is 299 speed, and then Jolly base 87 is 300, so it's literally perfect there. But on the upper end of that, obviously Cinderace at 119 and then Aerodactyl at 150 is fine. You don't generally worry about the gaps there. But between the Cinderace and Jirachi, you do allow base 115s to run Adamant and Modest. So stuff like Raikou, and I can't think of anything else, but that's definitely a bigger gap. But I think the speed tiers don't end up being as bad as they look when you put it into the calc.
Fair enough. In my mind, with the Hitmonlee, it's either going to do a fake out normal gem and get the Unburden boost, and it's going to be running Adamant itself, or it's running like a Rapid Spin to boost its speed.
Yeah, that's true.
You never know.
That's true. That's probably what it'll end up being. But a lot of people just like look at the opponent's speed and are like, "What's the like next slowest thing below me?" And I'll just outspeed that thing. So, but maybe, we'll see. I think this will be an interesting one to watch for sure. Especially Hitmonlee also has that Bulu combo with Grassy Surge, Grassy Seed. So
that is a good combo.
We can move on to the next team, which was the Portland Pelipers. So this is a very good team for pivoting. If you look over on the bottom right, like everything has a pivot move, pretty much. And I think that's going to be a big strength for this team because so many of them are like strong. They're either like strong offensive pivots or very bulky defensive pivots, which work very well together. Corviknight Gliscor is a really good pairing because their weaknesses are all covered, pretty much, not perfectly, but then Latios, like Corviknight's weak to fire and Gliscor does not resist, and then Gliscor's weak to water and Corviknight does not resist, but then Latios resists both of those, and then Alomomola and Incineroar can resist ice types. So those five just like really combine well in that regard. And then otherwise, you've got Mega Beedrill, which a lot of times its U-turn alone can just one-hit kill things, which is not something you see in very many Pokemon. And then Cortana is just like added on at the end as another thing that you always have to worry about.
Cortana is a super scary mon to be picked so late as well. I think there's a lot of extremely potent physical offense on this team with, like you said, the Mega Beedrill, you got the Cortana. Incineroar actually does a really good job here as well. I think that Incineroar fits this team really well. Corviknight, Gliscor are two very good options. Latios, I really like Latios on this team as well. I think that overall, like, the team synergy that he has on this team is really, really good. If we kind of look at what he does have on the team, the Smeargle is kind of like Mew in the fact that it can get like even more options where it can literally learn every single move. So you have your Stealth Rock spikes, Toxic spikes, Sticky Webs, pretty much anything. You can do anything and everything. But then you look at some of these other options for like defog. He has pretty much his whole team can defog. So when it comes to like hazards, I feel like it's going to be really hard to keep up hazards against this team, which is a really big thing for the Mega Beedrill to be able to do well. I think Alomomola is a really, really great pick on this team as well, where your Latios and your Gliscor are going to be weak to ice, and that Alomomola can kind of come in for free, take some hits, use Regenerator as it switches out, and then continue to be a pain. The couple things on this team, I really wanted to move this team up higher. I really, really like this team. But the fact that Latios is pretty much your only special attacker that's going to be doing a whole lot of damage is kind of difficult for this team. You do have the Comfey, which can do some Comfey things where it gets the triage ability and, you know, it can do different things on that side of things. And then Rotom is your other thing that's going to be able to hit well on the special side. But I'm very interested to see how Rotom Frost gets used on this team. I really like Rotom Frost. I think it's a great low tier pick. I'm not exactly what it's going to do on this team that isn't already being done, aside from being an ice type and an electric type. But I do think that there could have been some different options there that could have been used. The other thing I'm going to call out, I love Torterra. Torterra's got a special place in my heart. But having it on the team with the Gliscor, I feel like is a little redundant with that, with them both having the 4 times ice weakness against each other. And then the last thing I'm going to say that kind of made me push it down a little bit was the big fire weakness on this team. You do have the Alomomola and the Incineroar that can take care of that, but then you have the Corviknight, the Beedrill, the Cortana, the Rotom, and then the Torterra that are all weak to fire as well. So fire types could definitely be a problem for this team.
Yeah, I think the Torterra is like probably could be taken off for something else because you don't really bring it in any matchups that I can think of because it's kind of hard to use it as a grass type because it doesn't resist water, and then it's just almost all water types get Ice Beam. So that's probably the biggest threat to this team. I was going to say earlier water types and dragon types, and then I realized Rotom Frost is here, but even then Rotom Frost is kind of your main answer to both water types and dragon types, which is really weird. Obviously, you have Cortana, so you don't really even need Torterra as a grass type now with that. But I think this team is mainly going to struggle with dragon types because Latios is a dragon and it can hit them and it's pretty fast. But like if they have a Scarf and you don't, or they're just like a faster dragon, or they have Dragon Dance or something, you can't really rely on Latios for that. Comfey on its own is not strong enough with only 82 special attack. It can run Calm Mind and potentially do stuff with that, but on its own, you can't rely on it to break dragon types. And then Rotom Frost is good, but almost all dragon types will have like Flamethrower or something if they're worried about it. And you're also going to be relying on 70% accurate Blizzards rather than like Ice Beams that you could be having on other things. So that would probably be the biggest issue. But most dragon types are dual types. So case by case, like you'll see which other typing they're weak to and then abuse that from there. But I don't know. If this team faces like some dragon that it somehow can't handle, could be a problem.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think on a physical side, you really would have to or on a defensive side, you're going to have to rely on your Corviknight super heavily. And like you said, if they know it's going to be Corviknight or Rotom Frost that are going to be coming in, like a Flamethrower is an easy answer to both of those. So I totally agree with that. I do think that this team is very scary. It kind of hits all the points. If we talk also about like pivoting, this team can pivot all over. Like everything gets pivoting. It's able to move around. I think that that's going to be one of its biggest assets is being able to move around and get into some of these heavy hitters where whether it's your Mega Beedrill or your Latios or your Cortana or whoever it's going to be, and even things that resist are not going to be wanting to take too many hits, and then they can just turn out and get into the next thing. So I think there's a lot of neat synergy there with the team. It's just a couple of those holes that need to be filled.
Yep. All right. Then the next team is going to be Chicken Egg. And this team first picked Mega Blastoise, but that was like a joke. So if you're wondering why it was taken first, he like said if people react to his message, he would take Blastoise first. So that's why he picked it first. But it's actually pretty good here, I think. Overall, this team, like, it has like a good amount of offensive pressure in its first three picks. But like I feel like its typings didn't really come together. You also end up missing out on most important moves. So you have some hazard setting. Obviously, Deoxys is a great hazard setter, and then you have Rocks on Garchomp, which it usually doesn't want to run, and then Toxic Spikes on Drapion, which it also usually doesn't want to run. And then that's it. And then your Defogger is Tornadus, and your Spinner is Blastoise. So you're very limited in all those options. And then your only pivoting is U-turn on Tornadus, Teleport on Deoxys, and Flip turn on Blastoise. So it's a lot of things that are like forced to run certain moves if you want to have those like utility options available to you. And then the last thing that made me put this down was I mentioned earlier 2 people wanted to get Arctozolt. This is the team that actually got Arctozolt, and then it took Vanillux, which is like, if you're going to run Arctozolt, you really have to have Arctozolt and Alolan Ninetales, or I don't think it's really worth getting. But maybe I'll be proven wrong, and Arctozolt's actually good enough with Vanillux here. So if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, this team it's very interesting. Like if you look at like the bottom right corner, there's very few mons that do the things there, right? So if we're talking about pivoting or hazards or just some of the other support moves, like you were saying, it very much puts certain Pokemon into doing certain roles every single time. Not that they're necessarily going to be bad. Like running Rapid Spin on Mega Blastoise is totally viable as it gives it the speed boost, and then it can continue to hit super hard with its Mega Launcher ability. I think that Sylveon, Aegislash, and Garchomp are a really, really good core. I think that handles a good number of Pokemon, especially with Sylveon being able to like Wish Pass. I think that's one of the biggest things about this team is outside of Deoxys really not having much reliable recovery. So having Sylveon as a good Wish Passer is going to be really big, especially for the Garchomp and Aegislash. And even the Mega Blastoise. Like, I think that's going to really help the longevity of the team. I am also very interested in to see how that Vanillux Arctozolt works out. I think a better electric type on this team may have been a little bit more beneficial. The other things I'm going to call out, if we look on the bottom left side, again, we see fire is kind of a big weakness, and ground type is a really big weakness, with only the Tornadus being immune and the Virizion being or resisting. There are a lot of mons that are weak to ground type, so having to prep for that might be a little bit difficult. Other than that, like, there was just enough on this team that, like, I felt like it's going to do all right. Like, coming up against Garchomp and Aegislash, Sylveon, and then knowing that you have like a Deoxys defense there where you're able to get something a little bit bulkier. Overall, there's pretty decent bulk on this team. Deoxys defense is going to be kind of your main thing. Overall, I think that it could do okay, and that's why I didn't go quite as low, but I do think that it's missing a lot of potential threats that could do even better, and then a potentially different defensive mon than Deoxys defense. There's too many unknowns here that I could put it up higher, but I do think that it's got some really good pieces to it, and it could do well. I just don't know that it will.
Yeah. One other thing is I think Ghost is kind of a big issue here. Obviously, only two things are weak to it, but your only resistance is Drapion. Not that most teams have multiple resistances, and then Pyroar is just like not very viable, I don't think. And it's sort of acting as your Ghost immunity and your Fire type. And then you have to go to like your low tiers in Virizion and Pyroar to be your Fire and Grass types. So I wish there was just like a better Ghost resist, but maybe Drapion's good enough for that.
I almost forgot about Drapion, and I almost said like, oh, there's no Ghost resist or Dark resist besides Sylveon, but Drapion's there, and I do think that Drapion is a good mon. It's gonna run into the syndrome of it's gonna be trying to do too many things at once, I think, because it could be defensive with running Toxic Spikes and there to take some Ghost hits, but then you also kind of want to run it physically attacking with either like a Choice Scarf or Choice Band or a Swords Dance, or it's going to be very difficult using the Drapion with this team. I feel as good of a mon as it is, and I think it is a good mon on this team. It just needs a little bit more support.
Yeah. All right, then. You ready to move on?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. We are now on the San Francisco Nidokings. So looking at the first three picks, I was thinking like this would be one of my favorite teams, and I still like it. I don't think this is a bad team. But I think those first three of Mega Mawile, Zygarde, and Slowbro pair very nicely together. Slowbro being a slow pivot with Teleport can get both of those in safely, so they get to keep their bulk. Zygarde and Mawile both thrive off of being bulky, like being able to probably attack 3 times before dying. So Slowbro helps with that. And then the other thing I liked with that is Slowbro can run Trick Room, which is like very good for Mega Mawile. And you also have Porygon and Pangoro that can do quite well in Trick Room. Some of the problems, though, with this team, you have basically no Stealth Rocker. You have basically no hazards. Mega Mawile never runs hazards. I haven't seen that once in my life. Aerodactyl could, but it's still weird because it's frail and it's fast, and you really want it to be like your fast thing. You do have Jolteon, so like maybe Aerodactyl could be your rocker some weeks. On the removal side, it is better with Skuntank and Serperior alongside the Aerodactyl, but I really did not like that this team couldn't set any hazards really reliably, and that would probably be my biggest issue with it.
I think the Slowbro Porygon on this team to help out the Mawile and Zygarde is extremely good. I think that's going to be a huge problem for a lot of teams to deal with. I totally agree on the Stealth Rock side of things. Like having Aerodactyl be your only Stealth Rocker, it gives, like, if Aerodactyl doesn't have a good matchup that week, are you going to bring in Aerodactyl just to set up Stealth Rocks, or are you going to have to use that slot for something that's going to be a better matchup for the team you're playing. So having like some sort of option to lay down hazards is going to be pretty big for this team. Overall, this was a very interesting team for me to try to grade, I guess, because it does have some very interesting parts to it, like I was talking about. I also think that Entei and Superior are two very good mons that can really thrive under the right conditions. I was super surprised. I forgot that Superior gets defog. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's really weird. But that's really cool because Superior is a really good defensive mon that can start hitting really hard once it gets those contraries up and with the Leaf Storm. So it can be both bulky and be boosting up its attack. So it's a very cool mon that way. Overall, there are a couple things that I feel like this team was missing. Again, I feel like I've brought this up a few times, but the lack of a good special attacking mon on the team. You have Jolteon at your highest at 110, and then Porygon at 105, Regice and Slowbro at 100. So none of these mons are really going to be special breakers by any means. Like Jolteon can do Jolteon things of being fast and pivoting around and chipping things down. Slowbro, you're going to be running more defensively than not. Regice could be some sort of offensive set, but again, you're not really going to be seeing it in that regard all the time. And same with the Porygon. These all tend to be more defensive mons. So prepping on that side is going to be pretty easy for their opponent. But on the physical side, you do have the Mega Mile, the Zygarde, the Entei, Aerodactyl, Pangoro. Things are going to hit really, really hard there. So I do think it has a good physical offense. On the defensive side of things, it's okay. Slowbro, Zygarde, Mega Mawile, Entei, Superior, they all just have general bulk. Slowbro obviously is going to be a really, really great mon on this team. Same with Porygon. I do think that in general, this team does have some really good defensive mons it can use and can pivot around as necessary. I also do think that the lower tier mons of Pangoro, Skuntank, Jolteon, Regice, those are all very good low tier picks to bring to the team. The thing with this team for me is it misses a lot of that support. So if we look at the hazards again, not super great. If we look at pivoting, it's got Volt Switch and Parting Shot. You really only have two options there, and one's very fast and one's very slow. You do have two teleport options, which, like you said, Joe, are going to be really, really good to help get in the Zygarde and the Mega Mawile. But then that also requires them to start to take some hits, and that might be, detrimental later in the game. And then when you have like Heal Bell and Wish on Jolteon, Wish isn't going to be doing a whole lot. Heal Bell is a good option to have. But overall, I just think that there needed to be a little bit more to get some of these threats like the Mega Mawile and the Zygarde into the game.
Yeah. I think we've said all there is to say about this one. I think
so.
What I've noticed is I think special attackers are just less common in general. Just if you look at all the Pokemon, most are more physical. I'm sure if you did like the average stats, physical attack is definitely higher than special attack. So they're definitely a higher commodity, a more sought after one, but harder to get on most teams. So we've pointed that out on probably more than half the teams now. So I just wanted to say that, like, maybe it's not a problem, but like, I don't know. I think a lot of times, like, people don't generally draft like to get a lot of physical and special walls. So it's I don't know. It's not something I see a lot in draft league. People kind of just go matchup by matchup, but and they try to check your like best Pokemon. But I guess if your best Pokemon are Mega Mawile and Zygarde, you would like to see a special breaker. And now that I think about it, Superior is actually the special breaker here because Leaf Storm Contrary. But it's a grass type, and you're going to be walled by, I think, like 5 or 6 things resist grass. So not going to be able to work every time. But I think we can go to the next one.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So next up, we've got the Trinidad Tricos. And I had this at the bottom of all the teams because I feel like there's no Pokemon here that I really am scared of if I'm facing this team. Obviously, you always have to be scared of Darn, but you can usually just whittle it down with hazards. And this team's hazard removal is okay. but not the most reliable in every match. I think the reason I had this so low is I don't really know really what this team is doing. Like the speed is fine. There's like offense on both sides, but you've got a lot of things that you're very weak to. Like you've got a huge fighting weakness. Of your first 6 picks, 4 are weak to fighting, and then you got a huge rock weakness. Without, I mean, the hazard removal is okay, but it's not amazing. And then you got a water weakness as well. I was just looking at the chart to make sure I had the right typing there. So overall, not really the most synergistic in terms of typings, I feel.
Yeah, that's my main thing I have on this team is that you have a lot of redundant typings. You have Salazzle and Heatran, both fire types, both quad weak to ground. Not going to be super great. We also have the 2 ghost types with the Mega Banette and the Jellicent. And the only resist that we have on the team for a dark type is the Obstagoon and I guess the Galarian Weezing is there as well. Oh, I see the hit on top. Never mind. That point's irrelevant. But just in general, I do feel like that there's a lot of holes when it comes to different typings, like being weak to water, being weak to. There's a lot of ground weaknesses. There's a lot of rock weaknesses. It looks like we've also got a lot of psychic weaknesses based on the chart. So there's just so many things here that you're going to have to really prep super hard for if this is your team, right? So you're going to have to look at the opponent's team and say, okay, what can I do against this? Let's say, Garchomp, right? And you have a couple options of taking that out with like maybe a Darm or maybe a Jellicent can do something there, but the rest of the team is really, really going to struggle against something like that. So I think this team is going to have a really hard time prepping for some Pokemon.
Oop,
sorry, that's right. my dog decided to say hello because someone's at the doorbell, but hopefully it's just an Amazon driver, so we're good. We're safe here. No
all
worries.
Right. Other. Oh yeah, you can keep going.
But yeah, I just feel like just to wrap that up, there's not very many defensive mons on this team that are really going to do well to protect the other Pokemon on the team.
Yeah, and then something else I forgot to mention is the hazards are very awkward. Heatran is a very good hazard setter, but you're also going to want to run offensive sometimes. Lycanroc is very rarely going to run hazards, and then Weezing is weird because you have Toxic Spikes and Defog most times. Like, you're not going to want both. And I think Defog is just better for it, given the team. Like, you don't really want Defog Thundurus, and then if you can bring Rapid Spin Hitmontop, then you could probably make it work with Toxic Spikes on Weezing, but then you have to bring 2 of your lower tiers, which you don't. It's just not going to happen that often. And then, of course, you'd have Sticky Webs with Leavanny. How do you say that Pokemon's name?
That's how I would have said it, so
okay.
I think you're good.
Yeah, because it's like leaves. But that's a bug grass type, which is one of the worst typings in the game. So it's probably just going to be like Focus Sash, Sticky Webs, then Die. And you don't really need webs on this team because it's like decently fast, but I guess sometimes you might want it.
I feel like it supports Darm pretty well,
yeah.
But I totally agree. I don't think when you have other options on the team, it's not going to be making it very often.
Yep. That's all I've got for this one.
That's all I've got.
All right. Next up, we've got the New Jersey Nummels, or as some people say, Numels, but I always said Nummels as a kid. And this is the other most interesting team here, I think. It's one of two. We already mentioned the other one that went pretty much balanced on the points. This team did that to the extreme, with their first pick being Slowking Galar for 14 points, and everything else being less than that. Como and Skarmory, I think, are both 14 as well. And then everything else was basically just a mid-tier or like upper mid-tier pick. So that's like not something you see very often. So it was pretty hard to rate because I would say the biggest threats here are going to be the Como for sure with all its setup options and the Houndoom just because it's naturally strong. And then Shell Smash Blastoise is also going to be a threat some weeks. Overall, like, I would have liked to see something that's just like strong on its own, because it seems like everything really wants to set up, besides, I guess, the Mega Houndoom, which is actually a special wall breaker. Finally, we see one of those. Do you want to say anything about this one?
Yeah, this team is so cool. I really like this team a lot. I think that there are some really, really interesting mons, and it's going to be very, I don't know. Like, I feel like you said, it's really lacking some major punching out the gate. Like, you have your Mamoswine that's going to be hitting pretty hard. You've got the Mega Houndoom. Let's not forget about Vikavolt. Vikavolt with the base 145 special attack. Yes, it is slow, but it hits super hard, and it can roost up as well. Its defenses aren't terrible either, especially on the defensive side with base 90. Like you were saying as well, like Como-O, I drafted it this season. I've never used it before, but it gets so many setup options that you need to prep for it in every which way. If we look at things from like a support standpoint, it's really, really great hazards on this team. It's got Skarmory, it's got Miltank, it's got Mamoswine, it's got Excelgor. I mean, Como-O also gets the Stealth Rocks. You got Spikes, you've got Toxic Spikes, you've got Sticky Webs, you have two very good defoggers in Skarmory and Florges, and a very good Rapid Spinner in Blastoise. We are missing a little bit of pivoting and initiative with the Volt Switch from Vikavolt and the U-turn from Excelgor. I'm thinking you're probably not going to be bringing both of those where they share a lot of weaknesses.
You've also got the Flip Turn on Blastoise.
Oh yeah, you do. I forgot that Blastoise gets Flip Turn. Look at that. Blastoise got a lot better this gen, not going to lie. But overall, I do think that there's some really cool things. You also get the Heal Bell with the Florges and the Miltank, Wish with the Florges. You got some really cool options there. I think that this team has just enough to be a really, really good team. I do think that it could potentially struggle with some of those really big, high point threats. It's got some good defense with Skarmory and Florges. I think that's a fantastic pairing. Miltank does really well. Slowking Galar is a very, very popular Pokemon in draft right now, and it does really, really well. I don't know. I feel like this team has some really, really cool things about it. I just don't know why I couldn't put it a little bit higher. Actually, originally, I've had this team a little bit higher, but as I looked at some of the other teams, this one kind of fell down a little bit. Some of the main things being, like, I feel like Mega Houndoom could have used some sort of Sunsetter, being that it has, like, the solar power ability, and that could really make it a huge threat. So having something that could have set up that sun for it right off the bat would have been really nice. But other than that, like, I'm having a really hard time finding things super wrong with this team.
Yeah, you actually kind of sold me on this team. I think I should have put it maybe one or two spots higher. I actually like Mega Houndoom not in the sun, personally, because your Sunsetter is going to have to be Torkoal or Ninetales, and then you've got two fire types, and Torkoal and Ninetales aren't really that good. So I prefer Mega Houndoom as just like a very offensive. Dark Fire is a very good offensive typing that can just hit things, and I think it gets Nasty Plot. So
I can get behind that.
So I kind of like it not in the sun. Obviously, if you have a sun team, I think you're going to be going for Charizard Y at that point. So, but I don't know. Maybe you draft like 1 point full picks or something. But I think overall, like, since this team was going for balance with the points in all its Pokemon, you didn't really need to do that. And when I was doing my rankings, I was not using this prep doc. I was just kind of going off of what I knew, which maybe was a bit of a mistake because I forgot Excelgor actually got the hazard, so that made me put it a little lower on the hazard game. But it's definitely still very strong, and obviously Excelgor does get hazards, so that's not even like a relevant point. That's just something I made up in my head because I didn't know. And another thing I really like before we move on is Como and Skarmory's weaknesses are perfectly covered, if I'm correct on that, except for Como-O's ice weakness, which I guess this team isn't amazing against ice types, but you do have the Mega Houndoom for that. Otherwise, all the things that Como and Skarmory are weak to are resisted by the other thing. So that I really like that here.
It's a very good pairing. I feel like at first, like when you look at Como, it's got some pretty big weaknesses, but if you pair it with a really good steel type, it pretty much covers everything that it needs to.
Yep. And just looking at this type chart, the only major weakness would be fire and actually flying. But Skarmory is usually going to be fine to wall flying types. Although fire is definitely going to be a bit of an issue here because you can. The chart shows Mamoswine as being weak to fire, but it's actually not. So that's
True.
a little misleading. But still, fire types can sometimes come in and be annoying, and you're going to have to run Blastoise and make sure it can take the hits. But that's not a problem.
Yeah, I don't know if this chart has it, but Milk Tank also can run thick fat, so it can get the fire and the ice resist.
Oh, you're right. Yep. So, yeah, and it also gets Sap Sipper if you want to be immune to grass. Not that this team has any shortage of grass resistances. If you look on the chart, it has like 7 things that resist it. And then if you want a Milk Tank, but yeah, this is definitely solid. To the coach of this team, I'm sorry I put you this low. You should be a bit higher. So we can move on to the next one. And we are these are the last 2 now. So we have this one and the next one. And you can start this one off. We both really like this team.
This is such a good team. I know this is getting towards the end of the draft, and sometimes I feel like you can get some of the best picks towards the end of the draft because you get that good wheel pick, and you can see what hasn't been picked yet and really start to build around that. So grabbing Mega Scizor and then Clefable is such a good, first round of turns, and then grabbing Latias and Keldeo also very good. Overall, I do think this team has some really good options when it comes to what it can do. You've got some really good Stealth Rock setters with Clefable and Donphan. You've got some really good removal with Latios and Latias. I said that right the first time. Donphan and the Rotom. If you want to do that with the Rotom, you've got some great switch initiative. Lots of things can U-turn. Lots of things can, you have different teleport options, flip turn. I just feel like there's so much utility on this team to help Pokemon like the Mega Scizor, the Clefable, the Keldeo, even the Zarude setup. I think what stopped me from putting this team a little bit higher was outside of the Mega Scizor and I feel like there's really not a whole lot of really good offense on this team. Zarude and Donphan both have base 120 and can be used pretty well, but they really just don't do super great together. I feel like Mega Scizor and Zarude can really be stopped by like kind of the same things. But at the same time, I also feel like this team has some really, really good synergy with the Latias and the Keldeo, and then you have the Rotom Heat. I just feel like this team is crafted so well with some really good options and doesn't have very many weaknesses aside from maybe that fighting weakness, which Clefable and Latios handle extremely well. And you're going to be bringing one of those every single week for sure.
Yeah, and if you look at the fighting weakness, 3 of them are low tiers, so it's not really a big deal. Mm-hmm. So I think with Zarude and Mega Scizor, it is a bit of a weird pairing, but Zarude helps with killing bulky waters that Mega Scizor usually struggles with. And then both of them kind of get walled by steel types. I mean, I think Zarude gets like fighting moves, and I know Scizor gets superpower. But you do have Rotom Heat and Keldeo for that. And then Keldeo is a good setup option with Calm Mind sub. It now gets Flip Turn. So really everything here in those first 6 picks just seems so good to me and just covers the things that the other things are missing. And then I think the end goal is usually just going to be Swords Dance Scizor and win the game, but you have so many other possibilities, even like Nasty Plot Rotom Heat, because like you have Clefable and Latios who are probably going to be defensive, but they could also be Calm Mind if they wanted to, and then Rotom Heat might be defensive, it might be Nasty Plot. Donphan might be defensive, it might be banned. The only thing really holding this team back for me, I guess I have 3 things. So the first one is there's no grounded poison. That's not good. Although Clefable has Magic Guard, Mega Scizor is a Steel type, and then Latios and Rotom Heat are levitating, so you don't care too much. The other thing would be your only hazard is Stealth Rocks, and one of the setters is Aurorus, which is not a good Pokemon, I think. And then the third thing, which is the bigger issue, is I'm not really sure about these low tiers. I think Aurorus is just really bad, honestly, because its highest stat is HP, and obviously that's good. But it has a ton of weaknesses. It's arguably one of the worst typings in the game, maybe the worst. And it's very slow, and its special attack is only 99, so it's not like it's this like bulky special attacker. It's just like it'll do some damage. You do get like snow warning or blizzards, but this team doesn't have anything else that wants hail. Other than I guess Clefable is immune to the damage, but that's not really a big deal. And then Primeape, it's a cheap fighting type, but you already have Keldeo. And then Alolan Persian and Cincino, I like both of them, but they are your two fastest things at 115, and neither is like particularly threatening. So the speed isn't the best on this team, but like I'm kind of being nitpicky because they're still like Persian, Alola, and Cincino can still deal pretty good damage. Persian's more of a pivot with parting shot, and then Cincino's more like a usually banded attacker. So even though they aren't the best, they still can function as good fast attackers. And that's all I got.
I totally
think this
agree.
is really good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think once you all the way up to Donphan, I feel like the picks are just phenomenal. I also like Persian Alola and Cincino. Cincino is actually, I feel, a pretty underrated mon. But then the Aurorus and the Primeape, I see when you only have 5 points left, like with the 3 and the 2, it gets kind of hard to throw some things together. And if you can't find anything that fits your team great, I do think that the Primeape doesn't really do much for the team. Aurorus is a very interesting pick because it does get refrigerate, so it can turn like normal type moves into ice type moves, which could potentially be good. But like you said, it's never going to have the chance to do that because it's going to get super effectively hit by pretty much everything out there.
Yeah. Refrigerate is a very good ability, but unfortunately, even though we allow return in this league, its attack stat is 77, while its special attack is 99, and you have snow warning for blizzard. So I think like it seems good, and then you just end up running snow warning blizzard every time, which is like fine. But again, the bigger issue is it just dies. Go ahead.
Hyper voice.
Oh,
I think it gets hyper voice.
Is that?
Yes, it does. It does get hyper voice.
I think hyper voice is weaker than blizzard in the hail, though. After refrigerate,
maybe. I don't know.
But yeah, it's something to consider if it ever ends up coming.
Doubtful.
Either way, I don't really care because if you just bring the first 6 plus Donphan, like switched out for something every week, this team's going to do super well because it's just so well balanced.
It is. It's a very good team. I think that, we both saw, you put it 2, I put it 3. This team is extremely good and is going to be really, really difficult to prep for every single week.
Yeah. Well, we can move on to the final one. And
let's do it.
This would be the highest average rank for any team. We both really liked it. And for me, it was really hard to find any problem with this team. I'm like trying to think of one right now. I guess if I had to pick a problem for this team, it would be I would maybe want a better hazard setter that doesn't set stealth rocks, if that makes sense. So you've got 3 good stealth rockers in Seismitoad, Azelf, Diancie, and then you have Spikes on Maractus, which is not a good Pokemon, and you have Toxic Spikes on Dragalge, which is a pretty good Pokemon, but it usually is running Specs. And then Dewpider is like there for webs, but you're probably never going to bring it. It's just like the prep threat of it. That said, that's all I can think of that's bad. And otherwise, you have insane offensive pressure from like 5 or 6 different Pokemon every single week that are all going to be hitting with different type moves at different speed tiers with different like setup options. With Megalopunny having like Fake Out and U-Turn and Triple Axle, and then Scizor and Weavile with like Swords Dance. Chandelure is like a huge special wall breaker at 145 special attack, and then Azelf has some setup options and can run like mixed offense and a lot of good coverage. And then defensively, like you've got Zapdos and Scizor, which can be like either offensive or defensive because they're both good defoggers. And then Seismitoad is just a good setter, and as well as Diancie.
And this team is crazy good. It hits pretty much everything it needs to. Like you said, it's very, very difficult to find some things wrong with this team. If anything, we could say, like you already said, the lower, like ending your draft with 2 points and then for your last 2 rounds and having to pick up some 1-pointers kind of gives a little bit of a throwaway for the last 2 Mons, where, again, I don't think Maractus is that good. I actually think Dewpider is a better pickup than Maractus. Just because it does have that threat of webs and it can do some other interesting things like lunge where it's going to lower Pokemon attack stats and stuff like that. So very interesting. If anything, my one biggest complaint on this team was actually the Weavile. Like I love Weavile. Weavile is a really, really good Mon. I just felt like it did pretty much the exact same thing that Mega Lopunny is going to do. And it shares a lot of weaknesses with the Mega Lopunny. And so finding I do think that as a dark type, it's a really, really good offensive dark type, and it gets the priority with Ice Shard. And this is extremely nitpicky, but I just think that Weavile and Mega Lopunny do 2 very similar things. So maybe some of the points from that could have been used up on a different dark type, and then you could have got something a little bit better grass type than a Maractus. But that's pretty much all I could really say.
I think Weavile and Lopunny, they both have triple axle, which is new for this gen, obviously. So Lopunny used to have to run like Ice Punch, which isn't that good. So in that regard, they do that similarly, but Lopunny is, I guess, better suited for killing steel types, and then Weavile is more like your psychic and ghost killer. So I think they pair. I mean, I have them at 1, you have them at 2, so I guess that's my difference here. Weavile, I think it's very good for the Chandelure specifically because Chandelure's really not going to like certain typings. Obviously, it can deal with the psychic types, but Mega Lopunny is pretty averse to those. And then you've got Azelf weak to Dark and Ghost, so Weavile can kind of cover all that, having obviously Dark moves to kill Psychic and Ghosts, and then you have Low Kick, which is also present on the Mega Lopunny. So yeah, there's some redundancy there, obviously, with Lopunny usually running close combat. But I think as a Dark type, like, you don't really have to necessarily consider it an Ice type, even though it is. Even just as a Dark type, it still may have been the best option for this team, because it's just going to be able to come in and usually revenge kill whatever was in before, or just like be offensive as like a good lead or something like that.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, Weavile is crazy good, and I'm actually very glad I don't have to go up against this team this season. But like I said, that's just kind of the main things I wanted to point out with this team, and why I put it at 2 instead of 1. I feel like there's just that little bit of redundancy there with some higher pick Pokemon as opposed to the Volcaronavirus, which I felt like there was some redundancy, but it was more in the lower tier picks, which wouldn't be as crazy, but very, very close for me on whether this team was going to be 1 or 2. So overall, very, very scary team. And yeah.
One little interesting thing, I haven't been really looking at this, but if you look at the bottom left, it says type count, and it'll show you how many of each type you have. This team has every type, and I've looked a few times. I haven't seen that yet. Maybe someone else has that, but that's just like a cool fact. This team has a Pokemon of every type.
I'm curious now.
So I don't know. People can rewind the video and figure that out for themselves, but
I don't think so.
That's I guess that's a nice bonus. You know, you always have coverage for every type if you need it. Although, I was gonna say Dewpider doesn't really count, but you have Seismitoad and Scizor as the bug type. So the only type you're really missing is Grass because Maractus is not coming. But that's all right. This team is good enough without it.
Just barely good enough.
Yeah. So let us know in the comments if you think your team was rated too high or too low, and which team you think is the best. So otherwise, I have no more to say about any of the teams in this video. So Cam, if there's anything else you'd like to add?
This was very, very hard to do a power ranking for. I feel like all of these teams have things they're very good at. And I guess just as a quick disclaimer, like this is us just rating the teams, has nothing to do with the coaches themselves, just purely based off of the data here. So if you feel like we were too harsh on your team, it's just the team, it's not you, I promise. But good luck to everyone. I hope you all have the best season in Johto, and we will definitely be watching.
Yeah, so thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.
See you, everyone.